Sometimes it's only when we look back that we notice something we couldn't see at the time. Not because the past has changed, it's because we have. A conversation that once felt ordinary suddenly carries a different meaning. A memory we'd almost forgotten quietly returns. An experience we once dismissed begins to make a little more sense. I found myself thinking about that recently. Not in a nostalgic way, more with curiosity. Because it's fascinating how life can look different depending on where we're standing when we remember it. When we're living through something, we're usually too busy trying to get to tomorrow. We solve problems, we make decisions, we adapt, we carry on. There's really enough space to stop and ask, I wonder how this is shaping me. That question often arrives much later, sometimes years later. I've noticed that when people reflect on their lives, they rarely tell a story in chronological order. They don't begin with birthdays or school years, they begin with moments. I still remember. It didn't seem important then. I've never really thought about this before. It's interesting how memory seems less concerned with dates than it is with meaning. Certain experiences quietly stay within reach while thousands of others drift into the background. Not because they were bigger, perhaps because they became significant in ways we couldn't have known at the time. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response." People often think about that quote in relation to difficult situations. I find myself thinking about it differently. Sometimes the space isn't only between what happens and how we respond. Sometimes it's between what happened and the meaning we eventually give it. The event stays the same, our understanding of it doesn't always stay still. That feels surprisingly hopeful to me. Not because the past can be rewritten, it can't, but because our relationship with the past has a way of evolving. There are experiences that once felt defining, which later became chapters. There are conversations that once felt painful, which later became reminders of how far we've traveled. The memories haven't moved. Perhaps we've simply arrived at them differently. One of the things I've continued to appreciate through conversations with people is how differently two lives can unfold when the experiences sound remarkably similar. Two people might both remember moving schools or losing someone important or feeling misunderstood. Yet when they tell the stories years later, each person notices something different. One remembers loneliness, another remembers kindness. Neither memory is more truthful than the other. They're simply different ways of holding the same part of life. I've often wondered whether there's a reason listening matters so much. Until we hear another person's perspective, it's easy to imagine our own is the only one available. I've got a personal story to share. The discipline I was receiving growing up. At the time, I thought, why me? This is unfair, it's unbearable, it's painful. Why me? Oh, don't like this place, this discipline is unfair. Woe is me. And then now, decades later, I see the benefit of that discipline I received as a youngster. Same scenario, but now I've got a different perspective on it. Looking back isn't always comfortable. There are memories most of us would happily leave where they are. There are conversations we'd rather not replay. There are versions of ourselves we hardly recognize anymore. And yet, those earlier versions still deserve a little compassion. They were making sense of life with the understanding they had at the time. Perhaps that's all any of us has ever been doing. Something else occurs to me. Looking back isn't only about noticing what was difficult, it's also about recognizing what quietly sustained us. The person who believed in us before we believed in ourselves. The opportunity we almost said no to. The unexpected conversation that altered the direction of our lives. It's remarkable how often the biggest changes begin with moments that hardly seemed important at all. Maybe that's why I've become less interested in asking whether the past was good or bad. Life rarely fits into categories that neatly. I'm more interested in how people continue to make sense of what they've lived through. Because that seems to be more something we're likely to do, whether we realize it or not. Gradually, quietly, often without noticing. As this conversation comes to a close, I'm aware it doesn't really arrive at an answer. I don't think it needs to. Perhaps it simply opened a door that allows us to return to familiar memories with fresh eyes from time to time. Not to judge who we were, not to become trapped in yesterday, but to understand ourselves a little more gently than we once did. Thank you for spending these few minutes with me. I look forward to continuing this conversation with you.